newly. Mataji is a disciple of His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. She and her husband, Anant Rup Prabhuji, began the spiritual journey in Chicago in the early 1980s. Together, they started the ISKCON temple in Boise in 1986 as a small weekly program in their home. Now there is a beautiful mid-sized Vedic temple for their lordships, Shri Shirade Bhanke Bihari Ji. Her Grace Aruddha Mataji homeschooled their children and also ran the Govinda's restaurant for 6 years. And actually, this is what urged many mothers to know the secret of how she managed to do so much, along with homeschooling in a Krishna-conscious way, their 2 small sons, who attained very early success in their respective academic fields, while being renowned preachers in ISKCON movement. Currently, Aruddha Mataji travels to temple around the world to deliver seminars on Krishna-conscious parenting and homeschooling. She is the author of the Homeschooling Bible for ISKCON, Homeschooling Krishna's Children. Her monumental work, Srimad Bhagavatam, a comprehensive guide for young readers, is currently in production, having released cantos 1, 2, and 3. She is about to release canto 4 of this Bhagavatam curriculum for Gurukuls, homeschools, Sunday schools, and the rest. We would like to request Mataji to enlighten us on the topic, a homeschooling mom's schedule.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Really sorry for this delay. There was some technical problems on my end, and I had bad internet for some time. So now we are back together again. Thank you for your patience. And today I'm really excited to be with all of you. And it's a very special topic today that's it's going to be very interesting. And all of you, I understand, are looking forward to possibly homeschooling your children, and also on a bigger scale, maybe you would like to hear how to manage your time, especially as parents when you're raising children. Time management is actually a very big problem, isn't it? It's a very big problem because it seems there's so much to do, and how to accommodate everything, as well as trying to teach our own children. Also academically, especially if you're homeschooling your children, then you have full responsibility for your children's future. Everything is in your hands, and it's very, it's a cause for nervousness, isn't it? It's a cause for nervousness. So today I'm here to share with you some of my own experiences when my children were growing up and I decided to homeschool them. There were some very, very challenging moments. And overall, I learned as I went along. I was growing and learning how to manage my time. I didn't come with any perfect formula. And I also made a lot of mistakes. But just overall, just from those years, maybe I can share something with you. Now, sometimes we have very great expectations on ourselves, that we can just be picture perfect and do everything perfectly, just like devotees do, perfect devotees do. But actually, there's no perfect devotee. We are all very imperfect. But within that imperfection, we want to do something where our children are nicely educated. Prabhupada gave us 4 mottos. There's 4 principles of mottos that ISKCON follows. The first one is purity is the force, right? And then books are the basis, preaching is the essence, and utility is the principle. So today we're going to talk about the last principle that ISKCON follows, which came from Prabhupada. These principles that ISKCON is based on actually came from Prabhupada. And so what was Prabhupada's idea in following this principle? Utility is the basis. Because like I said, there's no there's no perfect formula that every one of you can follow. Each one has to adapt according to each one of you has to adapt according to your environment, isn't it? Now, as far as my experience went, uh, people, when I talk to people about structure in homeschooling and how to manage time, they're actually very surprised that there was no formal structure in my homeschooling. Nor did I follow any formal timetable. Not to say that this formal timetable doesn't work for others, but talking about my own personal experience, I have to say that the structure that we followed was very loose, and it would change according to, it would change according to our situation, in order to accommodate events that that would happen in the temple or outside, So, but the basic thing, the basic principle was that we always started with a morning program, and with after a little breakfast for the children, we would sit down to follow to study Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, that was our first thing that we started out the day with, and and uh, but this would change if we had a preaching program to attend. We would adjust the schedule, and by waiting to read Srimad Bhagavatam until after the program. So, and this happened quite frequently for me because we were running a temple. We had it started out with a small preaching center, and it turned into a mid-sized temple over the years. And we had festivals and preaching programs inside and outside the temple. So if we wanted to participate in all of them, our homeschooling would be worked around it. Sometimes we would try to fit in a couple of hours between two programs, and sometimes we would make up time on the weekends or evenings. So, for example, we were doing some school programs where we would go out to the schools, after we arranged with them earlier. Then that would many times would be in the morning, because school would start at 8 o'clock. Then we would postpone our homeschooling. So many such events would happen. And during festival times, we would also make the schedule very flexible. For example, during Janmashtami or other major festivals, we would have no regular school for 2 weeks. And instead, we would study. We would still have school, but it would not be like a typical school time. We would study the activities of Krishna from the Krishna book or the Srimad Bhagavatam's 10th canto. We would practice for plays and design costumes and props. We would distribute flyers and books at the university. And sometimes we would approach even teachers to bring their students for the event. So the children studied, but it was different. And these times are very, very exciting for them because we went out of that routine. And we would definitely have drama for that event, which normally everybody does, all temples and gatherings, they have that. They would write scripts for dramas, memorize their parts, and they would practice tunes on the harmonium to get ready for that. So we were working as it seems like we're not in the normal schedule of school, of books and things like that, but we're still covering the 4 R's, which means the reading, writing, reading, writing, arithmetic, and raga, which is music, right? So we were doing all of these R's. I call them the important R's in the academic curriculum for the children, for all of you who are homeschooling. So if we get these 4 R's in their study, then we have done good study. We don't need to worry. Now, this may come on a very formal way, or it may come on a very informal way, So, which means the way I did, due to circumstances. But I knew also that while I was doing this, they were actually doing it really well. They were covering these 4 hours, even though they were so out of the way. In other words, we were basically preparing for the festival. So, so this was basically, I had a loose structure, but it's not something that I recommend for everyone. It depends on your situation. It depends on your nature, what your nature is. You can, in order to do a structural program and manage your time nicely, you can have a designated place in the house where you would have a classroom where children they knew that this was school time, they had to study, and then when they are done, then they are not in that classroom and they can go and play, right? Of course, you can have playtimes in between as well. So for me, it was basically a structure. Within a loose structure, I did have a structure in the sense that every morning our day started with Srimad Bhagavatam. Then we worked on math, then Sanskrit and memorization, which means shlokas and things, and music. So music was generally fit in the afternoon. And so all this was done before my husband came home from work in the evening. So the real study was in the morning, which was mainly, study of Srimad Bhagavatam, which from where we covered many language arts, basically. But if you have a formal book for language arts, that's fine. You can always cover that as well. But my recommendation would be to start with some scriptural study, which is Srimad Bhagavatam would be nice, or you can read any other scripture. So it's also in this way the children their minds are very clear and pure, and they are able to, their brains become very sharp, and they start the day with very peaceful actually, and discipline is not such a big issue because they have been able to study Shastra, which helps in overall in the peaceful nature of the children, and so this is very important. It is also very helpful in promoting good behavior and discipline among the children. And sometimes we would skip homeschooling for that day. Of course, on that festival day, there would be no schooling. And we would always, if there was too much gap or we missed too much of school time, we could always make it up sometime in the evening or on the weekend. Or generally, homeschool children are always ahead of their peers. So even if they did miss, there's not such a big loss. So Prabhupada, and Prabhupada, talking about the fourth principle, Prabhupada was always very insistent on the fact that we should be very practical in approach in all facets of our devotional life, and especially with our children, because children are children, and they like to, they like to play, and they can behave like adults, But children are trained in homeschooling. They're trained to sometimes behave like adults, and sometimes with serious responsibilities, and other times they play like children. Now, children are able to accommodate both things. It's really quite amazing how well they accommodate both aspects, both facets. So and what does utility in is the principle really means is that we use material things in Krishna's service. For example, Prabhupada, in the Vedic culture, he talked about how sannyasis are not encouraged to use modern technology like cars, ships, and machines. However, Prabhupada did use that, all these things for the practical purpose of preaching Krishna consciousness to others. So I don't want, if you look up what Prabhupada had to say about this principle, utility is the principle, he said that in one letter, he wrote that how Krishna consciousness means practical living, not something idealistic and vague. And he said that how we must do what's needful, but whatever pleases Krishna. In another letter, he wrote that you should take it to heart that as what is practical and so so based on that, I made it very practical. I tried to make it practical. Sometimes during different subjects that they would study, we would chant a round or two rounds. So rather than thinking, okay, well, this is school time, so we can't mix anything spiritual with it. No, I would do that. Like we would chant rounds in between for a break, or they would have a snack or something. So and I also was very made sure that they had enough sleep, so that when they when they do their schooling, they're not cranky, they're happy, you know. So giving our children enough sleep is very important. In other words, we know every child can be different. Some children don't need so much sleep, some children need a lot of sleep. So we have to act according to principle based on that. So now to go back on reiterate on that is that this is a formula that really worked for me, because I was running a preaching center. We were, my husband was working full time. So, and in order to make best use of all the opportunities, I adjusted the situation for myself. But like I said, for others, for some of you or from all of you, a loose structure is not something that may work. You may want to have a designated place and time. For me, they were doing their work, like their math work and other work, everywhere. Maybe sometimes in the dining room, sometimes, in their own room. So I had to adjust, because in order to get my work done in terms of my breakfast ready, they would do it from the dining table, while I would be cooking. So it's not like when we are homeschooling, it's not like we are sitting with the children 24/7, like while they do their work. No. One of the wonderful things about homeschooling is that they develop good independent study skills. They're not being spoon fed. And that's one of the greatest advantage in homeschooling. The children learn how to be independent, how to find solutions for themselves, and 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 they do really well. In fact, after homeschooling, when my children went to Oxford, which is run on a very different principle than typical colleges like we see in America, there's a tutorial system where one teacher with one student, and the student is encouraged to study independently and have meetings with the teacher as needed. So these study skills became very handy in a college like that. And overall, it's very handy, because the children, sometimes we see that children are too much spoon fed, especially, in schools, because they are pretty much given everything, what to do. So homeschooling can work with different structures, and time can be managed according to your needs. The idea is, whatever the children are doing, as a parent, that the children are learning. They don't know as all these things. They think homeschooling is so much fun, right? It's really a fun playtime, but we know that they're getting a lot in. In fact, later on, when my children were asked, what do you think was homeschooling like? And they said, well, they don't remember homeschooling as being hard work or drudgery. What they remember about homeschooling, that it was just so much fun. It just was so much fun. It was one big playtime. Why? Because we were involved in so many Krishna conscious activities. And that's where the real education was. Sometimes we think that education means sitting inside a classroom behind a desk, but real education really happens outside. So when we take our children and participate in so many wonderful outreach programs, that they're learning a lot. They're learning skills and tips that is practically impossible to teach children if they go to school. Practically impossible, you know. For example, we were doing so many. We were as the children were relating with, people outside, making presentations. You know, what child gets so many opportunities on a weekly basis or daily basis to have that opportunity to be able to stand in front of an audience and present themselves and present their philosophy to devotees. We even did a prison program once a month. And again, who gets that opportunity to go to a prison? So homeschool children have amazing social skills. Their education is also very strong because they are able to do things that generally a child cannot do. It opens up their mind. They are relating with adults as well as their own level of children, their own age group. So they're working and dealing with all types of age groups. And this makes them very confident. It makes them very mature, and they also learn how to take responsibility, how to take responsibility. And that's very important for a child. We see in life today how children and parents, they have such a big generation gap. They don't relate with each other. In fact, they you can say the children are they're their own species. Why? Because they like to hang around their friends, and they have a different dress code, a different way of speaking, their own music, and what happens due to this uh, big generation gap? Children don't learn how to relate with adults. They don't learn responsibility, right? But in Krishna consciousness, there is no generation gap. Why? Because we're doing the same things that our children are doing, right? We have the same music, we have the same food, we dress the same. So there's so wonderful thing about Krishna conscious homeschooling and or homeschooling in general is that there is less generation gap. So so this is something. So the time management is naturally going to adapt your time, and how you're going to manage time is naturally going to depend on your structure. What kind of structure you want to build around your children. But my whole suggestion would be, even if you're having formal schooling, if you leave a little bit flexibility. So in other words, you act according to the principle of utility, then you could also get your housework done while the children are learning. Of course, during Srimad Bhagavatam time, I was there. I was not in the kitchen working or doing things, because that's a very, very special time that we need to use with our children in order to develop their spiritual life, right? To make them devotees. But within that time, I could see that they were learning a lot of material skills, like reading and discussion, evoked communication skills in them, so many, and then of course vocabulary and all those things. So that was a time where I needed to be with them. So, but during other subjects that you will need to cover, for example, math and other subjects that is required, especially in India, I know one has to follow these things. So you can do it in a way where you can always you give them some work, and while you're working on those things, you can be doing right there, your uh, your preparation for the lunch or dinner, whatever. So this is something a very tip where how you can use your time management. We have to give up this scare of what it means to teach our children. Believe me, even if you spend 2 hours of quality time, they will have done more. They would actually, I tried that, in summer, I took a curriculum, an outside curriculum. I bought a curriculum, and what I know, to my amazement, within 2 years, they had covered the entire, within 3 months, we have 3 months holiday here. Within 3 months of school during the summer, they had covered practically the entire year's worth of, of, uh, of school. Why? Because the quality time that we give our children during those 2 hours is more than what they get, in a whole month. So this is what we have to remember, is that even with this flexibility that you have to develop in order to keep everything else going in the house, even with that, the children will always be ahead of others, of their peers in school. So, uh, this is one of the things I was thinking, how you can manage your time, whether your structure is loose or formal. Either way, it works, you know. And yeah, so I think this one point at least I would like to open for questions. If anyone has any questions on this topic, I would be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for allowing a wonderful glimpse into your life and how, we all know that you have been successful in homeschooling your children, and they are really, they have academically excelled in their fields while also in Krishna consciousness. Thank you, Mataji, for letting us know about the 4 hours. Some devotees have questions regarding how did you, it can be flexible, thank you for letting us know that the parents can be guilt free while being flexible, because that can also lead to successful homeschooling. But while following the 4 hours, and going with the schedule of Srimad Bhagavatam and mathematics and writing and music, so how do we divide the time, and how do we are what there some fixed number of hours, or a duration of time that you would follow every day for these subjects?
Okay. Yeah. So regarding division of time, again, I followed the flexibility approach, because when we were doing Srimad Bhagavatam, some days it would be, uh, mainly an hour would be really good if you can spend an hour, studying Srimad Bhagavatam with them. And there's a whole process that I've already talked about in my previous seminars. But if there's very confusion about that, I would be happy to answer in this session as well. But so that would take like about an hour. Sometimes, though, when the discussion was going really good, then we would extend the time, and maybe a little break in between, maybe a little snack or something. Then we would continue again. And sometimes our Srimad Bhagavatam would be 2 hours. So we were very flexible. But typical time, I would say 1 hour would be good, where the children are taking turns reading the translation, while the mother or father opens it up for discussion. Okay. Then, of course, came the after having done this, one can do math. Children can do math, and that would maybe take, depending on the age of the child, a younger child would naturally spend less time, would get very restless. So, but in a typical math time would be like about 45 minutes or to an hour. That's good. Like I said, these two things have to be strong in a child, because English becomes the main basis of all humanities, and math becomes the basis for all science subjects. So by making them strong in these two areas, you're really doing a lot of good, because later on, whenever they decide whichever path they decide, the humanities or the science path, by giving them these two strong skills, they will not miss out. Now, I must emphasize, though, that the skill in language it should be given even preference over the math for some time, because when a child is very strong in the language skills, then even math becomes easier, because one is able to understand the, for example, if the medium is English, then by having a good, strong command over the English language, they can actually they can read math problems and they can comprehend the math problems really much easier without and less struggle. So the language has to be given the most emphasis, and I would try to make that as priority. In other words, their language arts and their language skills, and then comes the math. Okay, and then and as their language skills become stronger, their math time will naturally become the quality time, or what they can get, what they understand, and their progress rather in math will be a lot faster. Hmm? Now you can, and then you can, if you see the child's interest in math is great, you can also, emphasize that. It's not like I'm saying that you should only emphasize English. Okay, so basically it's an hour or an hour and a half, and scripture reading. Depending on the child, it could even be less than an hour. But what my point is that the day should start out like that, to make them, peaceful, and also to benefit spiritually, right? And so, then the math comes, and of course, after that, you probably will need lunchtime. By then, around children are hungry, so you give them some lunch, right? And some playtime. They need some to, children are children, and they need always some way to, physically um, express themselves, right? So, and then after lunch and some playtime, you can do the other R's, right? Which is, um, music. That's raga, and rote is memorization. Right? So we've covered reading, um, and discussion and all these things. And during that reading time, you can also have some writing time for them. So that's basically the morning time, is reading, the 2 hours reading, writing. And then comes the math, which is arithmetic. That's another R, right? Then comes the rote and raga. And for that, you can flip around. You can do music first, or you can do memorization first. Now, memorization really is helpful in sharpening their minds. So you could do shlokas during that time. It's very good for them, memorizing shlokas with meanings. And then, of course, music. And for music, there's ample opportunities. You can teach them different skills like harmonium, singing, learning how to play harmonium, not formally, but also through ear. How spontaneously, just by hearing, the child should be eventually able to take out a tune. And that can come through a few years of formal schooling. And that's what I did. They were learning piano because we are living in the West, and I couldn't find any teacher um, who would know how to play, who would know how to play harmonium. So they learned piano for maybe two years or something, and then I I had them take out by ear, just by hearing the music, because their formal training was very important. They got the skills, they got the keys and what notes they are, and all those formal things that one needs. And then they, I actually, there was one sannyasi, Ganapati Swami, who was visiting Boise quite regularly. He told me, he said, now, you should have them take it about a year. Just play a tape and see if they can, and encourage them to take it out by ear. And due to his nice advice and guidance, I was able to break through that. They may need more than that. If you want to give them more formal education, just feel free to do that. Maybe more years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. That's, whatever you need. It's up to you. But the point is that music is a very important part of our children's life. This is how they express creativity. And because children, if they're raised just like bookworms, it's very bad for them. And we see, even with children going to school in India, especially, we see how the child is overburdened by constant need for being pushed both at school and at home to excel, right? I've seen children with huge bags, that they carry with books, full with books. Now, and this is just because they need to compete, they need to be, this is how the structure of the school is. So this is, children are children, and growing up in childhood means that they should be able to play around and be children. And that's very healthy for them, and not be so overburdened by so much school life, especially in the early years. It's not really good for them. So one should be very careful that one doesn't, do that to become over ambitious and want to have the children cram everything in one go. Okay, so this is a very
Very
long
true.
answer. Yeah. Okay. Mhm.
Very true, Mataji. While they are overburdened in schools, here in home, while homeschooling, some parents have difficulty in disciplining their kids while both of them are of different ages, especially. So,
Mhm.
if you could kindly give tips on how to discipline them, on make them to sit to do their work, because they are always wanting to play, or these days wanting to see gadgets and all. So, if
Mhm.
you could please guide how to make them sit to do the work.
Mhm. Yeah. So, like I said, if we start the day with some morning program and reading the scriptures, discipline becomes less of a problem, isn't it? It becomes less of a problem. So, one should. Why do children misbehave? Why do children, and how to curb misbehavior? So the point is that if children are not sufficiently engaged, it's natural they will create problems and demand attention. So we should engage them nicely. In other words, we should channel the naughtiness into productive behavior, so they use their energy and be happy and active. So children are very playful by nature. So we shouldn't try to curb their playfulness. Instead, we should try to dovetail it in Krishna conscious activities. That's why homeschooling has to be a lot of fun for them. Because by children, by nature, they like fun. If they see that the homeschooling is becoming like a big chore and a big burden, then naturally they tend to misbehave. So the purpose of giving them good, the purpose of, for example, if they're being misbehaved, and we want to punish them or be strong with them, is really not to instill fear, mm, but uh, rather to help them purify their hearts. So we have to find solutions how to, so that their heart can be purified. So in other words, we have to give them a higher taste. And once they give them a higher taste, then they will give up their lower tendencies. And if they are still misbehaved, so naturally we would have to think of um, some punishment. But that punishment should not be very, discouraging for them to want to study, but rather it should be in a way where they can reform quickly. The punishment that I generally used for them when they were misbehaved and they would not listen is that first I would try the verbal approach, that, and I would scold them when they were naughty or didn't do what they were supposed to do. So basically, I had a very firm voice and very stern look. And when they saw that, usually, they almost always, they would do what I had to tell them, because my voice would be very firm and I would have that stern look. They knew, because they knew that we loved them so much. They knew that in order to please us, they would have to behave well. I did not use any other system which is very common among parents, and they have their own reasons for it, good reasons for it. Things like timeout, like if they were naughty, I would, you know, uh, parents use other ways where they would, ground them. It's called grounding, where they are not allowed to play with their friends that day or something like that. But I did not use that because I felt that it goes against the principle of trying to help them to become Krishna conscious. So because when I did try them for some time, they would become irritable and resentful. So ultimately, I realized that um, it was Krishna consciousness. By keeping them fully engaged, the children are, able to overcome that naughtiness. And there's so much, especially when children are young, you can do art projects, which is so much, keep them engaged in that way. And it's not like everything else suffers when we do this, because in homeschooling, the wonderful thing is that you can make it very flexible, very flexible. Even while they're doing art projects, you can run in the kitchen or do something in the house that needs to be done. So children, they like fun. And if we keep them engaged in this way, where there's time to study and there's time for fun, they can see everything in the proper perspective.
Yes, thank you so much, Mataji. And one more question comes up connected to this is when you yourself are engaged, suppose the parents are engaged separately in attending counselor meetings or some, hearing to their Guru Maharaj's lectures, how do you find engagement for your kids? Like what separate engagement could you find for your children that, they engage themselves in that time?
Braj Vallabhi, this question is so wonderful because it's a very important question, in other words, because one principle that I always followed is that whatever I did it with my children. Okay. If we need to hear a class, the children should also be able to hear a class. If they're not able to sit right now due to their age, sit in class and actually hear, then I don't hear at that time, So, in other words, instead, I would read scriptures with them, until they are old enough where they can be with me and we can hear together, So we can always read Bhagavatam together or any other scripture, any other scripture like Chaitanya Charitamrita. We can do that. So children, when you do things with them, they feel a part of the Krishna consciousness. They feel they can relate with it. They feel a part of it. But if you leave them to do the other things, then these are the children who may get distracted in later life, where they don't want to. They have doubts. They don't want to be part of Krishna consciousness. Why? Because they see it as time where their parents are, having their own interests while they are left alone. So it's important to make the children feel a part of our life. So we always did things together. Whatever I did it with them. And so if I was, if I needed things get ready for a festival, they were there with me to help me, clean the altar, get so many things ready in terms of cooking and even shopping. So I took them. They were part of my life always, and that's a very important thing to remember. I remember when I gave a seminar with my son in Chowpatty, then our seminar was attended by many brahmacharis also, because they were preaching to so many householders, and they wanted to get a perspective on how to preach to the householders so they can so the children, they can raise good children. And one of the things that one of them told me is that the problem is that how to inspire the children or the parents, because when the parents are so eager to serve in the temple, their children don't want to be a part of it, and they want, and by leaving them at home, they don't feel connected. So they could see the value of this, that parents need to be with their children and need to cater to them. Prabhupada said we should, children are like deities. We should take care of them in that way. They're very precious. These are children who are born in devotee families. They're not ordinary children, and this could be their last life. And we have to be actually helping them to train them. Okay. Anyway, this is.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Yes, Masi, thank you so much. This also reminded me of my mother. She would always keep us with herself and, be a part of our life every time.
Yes.
So, Mataji, one more question that the devotees want to know is, at what age and for what subjects should we hire a coach for the kids?
Okay, yeah, good question also. Well, whenever you feel that it's getting too much for you, you're not able to really, sometimes you're teaching math, and while in the lower grades it's easy, right? And then they get into higher math, and that becomes very difficult. Then at that point, we know it's time to get somebody. And I would encourage people to, parents to have tutors at coming to their home, so you can pretty much supervise and know what's going on, rather than sending the children. If that's possible, you have the tutor come at home. If not, they could go, I'm sure, but it was always better that way. This way, you have a connection with the teacher, you know how the child is doing. Okay, so yeah, whenever you feel that it's getting beyond you, I'm totally not against it, because even in any subject, if you feel that it's beyond your capacity, or you just don't have the thing in you to do it. The reason why homeschooling is so wonderful, that even if the children are having tutors at home, still, because the children are not learning the values from outside, from their peers, it still becomes a very good alternative, because we're protecting our children from that, those other values, the outside values, which can be detrimental, especially nowadays. We see that, right? So that's pretty much my answer. Mhm.
Thank you, Matthew. And one more question is, what age earliest can we start reading Srimad Bhagavatam for kids?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's a book that I have, and it's called Homeschooling Krishna's Children, and it's available at the Golden Media publishers, and this is in Delhi, and definitely I can give the contact information. This little book that was published by BBT was is really the ABCs of homeschooling, and it covers all the different aspects of how the practical aspects of how to homeschool our children. So if you can make use of that, that would be very nice. But to answer the question of how early, well, I would say that even before they begin reading, even before they can actually read the translations, I would you can still begin Srimad Bhagavatam, because I would say at the age of 4, you can seriously begin, where you read to the child from Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, and you explain it as to what's happening in terms of translations. You can read to them, because if you start reading purpose to them, they will get very restless. And and as you read, you can explain and make it very wonderful and dramatic, so the children's interest is there. One time I tried to do that with a little girl, and the mother was so amazed, because 45 minutes she sat and she listened, and we were doing the story of Hiranyakashipu, and Prahlad. So in this way, the children are learning even at that age. They may not be able to read, but yet they're learning. And then as they get older and they learn how to read, and you're teaching them how to read, then they can directly also read from Srila Prabhupada's books. So Bhagavatam can be done very early in a person's life. But I would definitely recommend reading only translations with them and not going into purports. If your child is older and you want to do it, with more discussion, then you could read some purports ahead of time, so that you can bring those points to the children in the form of discussion.
Thank you, Matthew. So one more question of parents who are sending their kids to regular schools. So they want to know, actually, like after such a hectic schedule, once they return back home, how should they engage their kids in a spiritual way and inculcate some of these activities, because the kids are too stressed out and tired.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very legitimate question, because it's challenging, right? Especially if a child has spent 8 hours in school, how to get him into a frame of mind where he can do scriptures, right? Or discussion with us. It is a challenge, and you can see, even if maybe you can let them play for some time or eat, especially they need something at that time, and then maybe you can sit down with them later, maybe for 20 minutes. If the children have so much to do and there's not enough time, just a little bit would also goes a long way, because the touch of Srimad Bhagavatam is so purifying, right? And if that's also not possible, so you can do it on the weekends, but some time should be allotted to the study of scriptures. I've seen through my experience in life that no matter what you do in terms of, giving them good association and having them participate in so many activities outside, but without Shastic reading, without doing some scriptures with them, because when we read and hear, then it really it puts the intelligence in the proper perspective, and many doubts are answered, and children make sense of of this world, why it is like that. And because children at a certain age, they're questioning, they're making sense of the world, they have so many questions. We can of course verbally tell them, but the effect that it has when they actually read and find the answers from these scriptures, that effect is very long, deep lasting. When we read the stories of King Parikshit Maharaj, Yudhishthira Maharaj, all these great souls, one after another, and their life, and how they themselves struggled with different issues that is part of material life, and how they responded and how they reacted to that. These are such important life lessons, because this is what material life is about. They were also dealing with the problems of material life. But what we learn from them is how they responded to that. So when we apply these principles in our practical life, the effects are so long, deep, and these children are able to go through life confidently, knowing the nature of this material life and how a devotee responds to it. So my take on this is that studying Srimad Bhagavatam with our children is so very important. It's actually the most important in your homeschooling or not homeschooling, even if you're not homeschooling, because this will help them if they're going to school. This will help them to put a perspective on that. What children, I notice when they're going to school, what is the biggest problem is that there's two conflicting things happening in their life, right? One is what they're learning outside, which is totally the opposite, quite a bit, right? Because things are not dovetailed in that way to please Krishna, but rather it's a materialistic education. We have to face it, right? And what they're learning there is naturally is basically what Prabhupada said, is that nowadays, especially in the West, we see that nowadays education is simply teaching them how to eat, sleep, mate, and defend. And that, he said, is actually innate in us. Nobody has to teach us, these things. In fact, Vedic education means how to curtail these things, minimize these things so that we can do something more, right? So taking that into stride, what the schools are, what they're in for, these children, it's okay, you cannot homeschool and this is what they have to do. Fine, but knowing the reality, it really helps. In other words, now how to take that education and make them do it in a way where they can see it in perspective, for what it is. And that happens to the study of scriptures. So whatever time you can give would be beneficial. Don't get discouraged, if you cannot give them time every day, try, actually children get really attached to it once they enjoy it. But at least if you cannot do it every day, do it, maybe once a week, twice a week, whatever you can do. Okay.
Thank you, Mataji. Some parents have a question that if they can start directly from Srimad Bhagavatam, or do they need to introduce first some smaller books or of Srila Prabhupada or any other book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, any book of Srila Prabhupada's, whether they're, small books or big books, they're all transcendental and they're all valuable. My humble experience has been in the area of Srimad Bhagavatam. I find that as the most powerful because Srimad Bhagavatam comes in the form of stories, right? It comes in the form of stories. And children love stories. And this is how they can relate. Why do we have so many children's books in ISKCON? All stories. Because this is how children learn, because they can relate with stories. So when we and there's a lot of philosophy in those books. Everything that the small books are covering, everything that Bhagavad Gita is talking about, is all in Srimad Bhagavatam. Not to say that you should not do Bhagavad Gita. You could do it every day. You can do a couple shlokas every day, right? But my point is that the real, study should be through Srimad Bhagavatam, whether homeschooling or not, because it is given in the form of stories. Children are able to use it and relate with that, and use it in their life in a practical way. These characters in Srimad Bhagavatam, they are not just characters. They are absolute personalities where when we read about them, the children actually inculcate their character. And as they get older, they can also appreciate instructions, right away, as they read about them. So these are not fictitious stories. They are real stories of real people, and therefore, when they hear from them, they're able to imbibe those very character, and it's a lot easier for them.
Thank you, Mataji. There's a connected question. Some
Yes.
parents want to know, like in Bhagavatam, for example, in fourth canto or otherwise, there are purports explaining how one begets a child, or how it grows in the womb. So how can one ask the kids around 4 to 16 to read such things?
How can we expose our children to those things, right? Yeah, to
Yes,
these
ma'am.
things, to these topics that are very adult topics, you can call them, where children, for example, the Puranjan story will have has some detailed descriptions of describing, Puranjan's, relationship with his queen, but also, there's section which describes, elaborately about the attraction that men have for women's breasts and things like that. So all these things become a little odd for children when we read with them, right? But we have to remember one thing, first of all, that anything in the Bhagavatam is transcendental, and nothing in the Bhagavatam can be detrimental for our children. We have to understand that if we don't give it to them, this knowledge from the Bhagavatam, then they will pick it up anyway. The way life is today, especially, of course, if they're going to school, they will definitely pick it up. Even for homeschooling children, they will pick it up. Some way or the other, they will hear about it. What to speak of children who are watching television, going to school, there's ample over there, right? So when we give it to the Shima, so what is better? If we let them pick up this type of knowledge, through outside sources, what are they learning? They're learning that basically that sex is something one does for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam teaches that there is a higher principle. That sex can be used for it to serve Krishna, in the way of procreating good children, in a proper marriage, in a formal ceremony where husband and wife, man and woman is married, right? And we have so many examples in the scriptures of good grihastha life, of good couples who have used, this sex for raising good children. So many nice examples, right? The Prajapatis, Daksha, and Kashyapa Muni, they were asked by Brahma to create progeny. They are very good examples. We have examples such as Prithu Maharaj and Archie, Karda Muni and Devahuti. So all these are wonderful examples for children to learn. Whereas there are also examples which is meant to for children to learn that if they approached these topics in a wrong way, then the effect is just the opposite. What do we learn in the Puranjan story? Ultimately, that Puranjan and his wife had to undergo much suffering due to their wrong approach. due to their approaching each other in a way that is materialistic and sense gratificatory, right? So they can see the effects of both. And in this way, they can understand that all these things can be used in the service of Krishna. Because this is the nature of the material world. The whole material world is based on the principle of attraction to man, from man for woman, and vice versa, right? They're living in a family, they have mother and father. They know it's not something that is beyond them, right? They live in a family where they know there's a relationship between a man and woman. So, but giving it them in the proper way, they can actually benefit. Of course, we don't discuss the details of sex life with them, and children don't have a problem with it. They know that certain things are beyond their, it's beyond their, um, you know, their they haven't earned it as yet, you know. In other words, it is not something to be done, and they are not really curious at that point, because this is not something that they had not been awakened in them. So it's not like they are pushing for details, so we can go through those areas quite quickly and not discuss the details of that. Okay.
Thank you, Master. One more question is, yeah, so shall we start directly with the first canto, first part of Srimad Bhagavatam, or we should start with stories? And can you please mention if stories, so which specific cantos,
Yes.
with stories? Yeah.
Yeah. So initially, if you're starting out Bhagavatam with them, uh, first time, and you see that they will, you know, they don't have the develop the interest as yet, that attraction, you could start with stories. You know, there's so many stories there. Dhruva Maharaj is one story, and it's has 5 chapters in that. Is one story I recommend for starting. Or Prahlad Maharaj, you know. Uh, Gajendra and the crocodile is also another nice story to begin with. um, you know, the Jay and Vijay story, you know, how they were cursed by the father. That's in the 3rd canto. Can also that section, which begins with chapter 15, I believe, where there's description of the sages entering Vaikuntha, you know, going to Vaikuntha and being stopped. Actually, it's the description of the Vaikuntha world. That's which is a very, very wonderful chapter. And then the sages are coming there. Then the next chapter is about the curse and all that. So that's another very good story to begin with. Um, there's many stories. Durvasa Muni and Ambarish Maharaj is also a wonderful story in the 9th canto to begin with. So there's many choices. However, if you want to start with canto 1, that's also a possibility. Thanks to all the efforts of parents around the world who are helping in this in the publication of these Srimad Bhagavatam guidebooks that we are humbly trying to give to you. And these are guidebooks that we began from Canto 1, and now we're working on Canto 5. We actually have 4 cantos published and ready. In fact, the 4th canto is supposed to be printed in Delhi very soon. Due to the lockdown, things have been delayed, but it's ready and with the publisher for the purpose of printing. So this, because we have these guidebooks starting from Canto 1, you could now begin with Canto 1 if you so desire, because the guidebook is giving it in a form which is easier to digest for children. However, I still recommend, even when you're using the guidebooks, that you still first you do this methodology of reading translations directly from Prabhupada's books and opening for discussion, and then going to the guidebooks. Now, the guidebooks has a summary of the story, which you can read with the children, read to the children, and there's a set of higher thinking questions which you can also utilize during your discussion time. Then we have many other activities in the called analogy activities, introspective activities, critical thinking activities, and all these activities are developing the key themes of that chapter, which the key themes are also given. They're developing the key themes and philosophical points that are in the chapter in the form of activities. Okay, so it becomes an easy way for children to study philosophy through these activities, you know. So, and there's a lot of variety. You don't have to do every activity, you can pick and choose. There's also fun things like crossword puzzles and word searches and things like that. So these books are available, and maybe Braj Balabi, you can share sometime the information that I can send to you with your groups
Yes,
where they
Mataji.
can, yeah. This basically is Golden Media. If you go and see their website, you'll get to know. And the devotee who runs that publishing house is called Nan Gopal Jeevan Prabhu. You know, and
I will
and
share the contact number on the chat box, Mataji, so that
good.
everyone can contact.
Yes,
Also,
yes.
I would like to thank you and let everyone know that thank you for extending yourself for the kids of the community, Mataji, so much. Besides the guidebooks, Mataji is also working hard, and every week she's conducting seminars and sessions to allow parents and teachers to learn how to teach Srimad Bhagavatam to kids. This is starting from Canto 1 and it's available. The recordings are available on YouTube on Vaishnava Academy channel.
Well,
So we will,
Braj Balavi, I now there's another channel where we're collecting, we are putting everything in there. So we have our own channel.
yes, I'll
So
share the links of both, Mataji, from the group
yeah, so
on the chat.
Vaishnav Academy, the same things are also presented in this channel. So yeah, you can,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
Also, one more question, Mataji, devotees want to know is
Yes,
do the
I have time.
homeschooling,
Hmm.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, like,
Mhm.
do the homeschooling children feel isolated or left out or disconnected with the society,
Yeah.
while being homeschooled?
I was wondering when this question is going to come. It's one a very popular question is how do they, manage their social life with, do they feel left out with the other children? And it is something to be aware of and concerned about. It's a very legitimate thing because children, they need social outlet and things like that. So we have to understand that this concept of school, first of all, began only 50 years ago. This was not something that was the norm. The, the process the methodology that was the norm is in the Vedic culture, as well as in America, just only 50 years ago, it was quite different. In other words, there would be one teacher with some students. It was more or less the tutorial system, and these children would be of all different age groups, and the teacher would take care of their problems. They would go one by one to the teacher and learn and present their problems in their schoolwork. So in other words, so it wasn't, so sometimes we think that being you know normal means that one should needs to have at least 20, 30 children around them in a classroom, and that's how a child can come out to be like a normal person, like a normal child. Actually, it's not true. In fact, they've made studies that how children, they today growing up in obviously they're all going to school, they have very poor social skills. Why? Because they are dependent so much on the digital media, and due to that, they're lacking social skills. As you know, the smartphones, and the social media and all these things, they are making our children depend so much on this technology that they're losing their skills for personal interaction face to face. So homeschooling doesn't need to be that they, in a way that they lose their social skills. In fact, it's just the opposite. By relating with people of different age groups, they actually become more socially capable, right? And not being dependent so much on the media, on the electronic media. In fact, there's, we know who Indira Gandhi is, right? So, and this person who became a great statesman, and Prime Minister of India, She was actually not even high school educated. How did she become such a great politician? This is just a material example, but but it still teaches us one very important point, is that how did she become such a great, politician? Is because she would stand behind the chair of her father Nehru, and learn while they from the conversation that he had with other diplomats. She learned politics just by hanging around behind her father's chair and learning and hearing. So in other words, we shouldn't think, I've already expressed that these skills can be only given when children are in that formal atmosphere. In fact, we know that how children in schools, they don't learn much, and we are frustrated, and we have to even hire tutors extra. So why not homeschool them and hire tutors if you're having a struggle? That's the point. And by having healthy friends around them, they can always have friends. They can go over to their house, they can come to your house, they can play around, with them. And of course, going to the temple also takes care a lot of their social skills. When such children participate in dramas, festivals, get a chance for them to present, show leadership, maybe in bhakti brikshas also, there should be some ways where children can also put up things for the parents. Children should be given opportunities in every area, right? So these children are not lacking, social skills. In fact, the social skills are a lot better, you know, and more healthier.
Thank you, Mataji. One last question, Mataji, that everyone would want to know is that how would you manage your chanting and your personal sadhana
Yes.
while doing so much of household work, the Govindas and taking care of the deities and children, homeschooling children so wonderfully?
Mhm. Well, that's always a good question because that is, for me also, it was a big challenge. I when I first started homeschooling my children, they were, I was a fairly new devotee. Actually, I wasn't like a seasoned devotee or anything, and I was always thinking how to, um, how to, I was also uh, like didn't know really what I was doing, but and especially struggling so much for my chanting purpose was immense. But what I would do is I would catch different times where I would um, find time for chanting, and of course, as the children are getting older, and they were themselves chanting, so the many whatever rounds that they were chanting, I would make sure that I was also covering my rounds so that I could chant with them. That's the best way to introduce children to chanting, by the way. Japa is to actually do it with them. Hmm? um, it's very important, because this way children don't develop bad habits, right? They don't develop bad habits. And we can inspire them by our own personal example. Good time is also, for children to learn japa is through get-togethers with other devotees during Ekadashi, and we can take a vow to chant that many rounds. Just this is on a side point, but our own chanting we can catch at least that time when children are chanting, and we can also catch different times during the day where we can do. So doing things, in chunks, like a few rounds in a chunk, 4 rounds, 4 rounds, 4 rounds, 4 times. One can try that way, how to do a number of rounds, and try to complete our rounds in this way. If you're, if morning catching a few rounds, nighttime before going to bed catching a few rounds. What I'm trying to say that one should not be too hung up on, doing everything perfectly in homeschooling or without homeschooling. Even when the children are going to public school, one should not be so hung up in these things, because if we don't allow ourselves flexibility to adapt to our environment, then it creates a lot of suffering and hardship. We have to do so many things, right? Homeschooling or not homeschooling, there's so much to be done in the house. We have to make sure that the family is well fed. We have to make sure that, after a husband comes home, that he's taken care of. So many things. Um, so one has to have a very positive image. We have to always remember why we are homeschooling. What is the purpose behind the homeschooling? And this is our way to please Krishna. So when we put Krishna in the center of our life and we pray to Krishna, sometimes I would, try to chant, you know, uh, in very odd ways, and I would pray to Krishna that to please help me, right? So it's the sincerity that Krishna is looking for, not perfect action. He knows our situation. Krishna is so kind. He's so adapting, right? So we know that Krishna's mercy is there for us. So if we try our best and adapt to whatever situation are there and not get frustrated, we really cannot homeschool if we are thinking that we have our own agenda, that we need to carry on. Really, homeschooling is a big sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice that we do joyfully. It's because the rewards, when we see our children growing up in Krishna consciousness, the reward that we get from that is so amazing that we will be able to carry on, and it's so much fun also. In fact, after they finished homeschooling, I missed it terribly. I was thinking, well, how am I going to conduct my life? It was so much fun, but that doesn't mean I didn't have the struggles. That didn't mean that. So one should not think that the struggles won't be there, but these are good struggles. These are struggles that we want to do in our life, uh, because material life, the way material life is, if whether you're homeschooling or not, struggles are going to be there. I don't know of any parent whose children are not going to school, who are going to school, who don't go through struggles. In fact, their struggles are even bigger because they have to worry about projects, they have to worry about homework, and in addition to what the child is bringing back from school, is full of stress. So why not do this, overcome? Why not be ready to face this stress, which has such wonderful results for us, so pleasing to Krishna? Okay. So I also did some practical tips, like when I realized that time was short and it's hard, I redesigned my kitchen, where things could be done faster. The cleaning could be done faster. The cooking could be done faster. So you can take all these practical things and see what you can do in a more practical way. Your menu, you can adjust your menu in a way that's healthy, but all at the same time simple, where you're not doing elaborate things. However, we make sure that everybody is satisfied, you know. So adjusting your home life in a way that you can accommodate. Go in with a very positive way. This is something I'm doing it not just to create wonderfully academic children, but I'm doing it to please Krishna. And whatever it takes, I'm going to struggle it out. I'm doing it because I want to raise my children in a Krishna conscious way.
Mataji, does it mean to sacrifice rounds and the sadhana? Somebody has asked a question, but it'll be nice to clarify that.
I know that parents who are going through the difficult process of having children and whose children are just a few months old, they've had a lot of struggle, chanting, finishing their rounds, and they've even taken advice from their spiritual master, and many of them have answered in that way to be practical, because the situation is too demanding for them, bodily or physically, and during that time they could maybe possibly hear more, and then pick it up as soon as they're able to. However, the husband, they've been recommended by the spiritual master that the husband should not give up, because by continuing his chanting, he is able to maintain that spiritual perspective, and that also helps the wife. So I'm talking about very extreme situations where it's practically impossible, in situations where the mother is, has given birth and the children are very little, right? And then, of course, comes the toddler period where children are really like quite a handful, right? Where they're doing so many difficult things, even earlier, in fact. So before toddler, when they're 6 months old or 1 year, it's very, very demanding, very demanding. And I know that. So those times one has to really cry out to Krishna to help you to chant your rounds. And a cooperation from the husband and support from the husband is very nice during these times, because then maybe there is a time when you can do your chanting while he takes care of the children. So also working together cooperatively with the husband, and the husband being supportive and caring, that really also helps in completing one's sadhana. But yes, we should maintain our sadhana, and because that is one of those most important things for a devotee's life, and go to the spiritual master, or go to talk to the husband, where both of you can work cooperatively.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for this wonderful session. We are so very grateful to you for having spared your valuable time and enlightening all of us so beautifully. Mataji, would like to request you to continue to come again and again and guide us with more parenting seminars. We thank all the participants for having joined us today. You all may join for future webinars by connecting with Practical Spirituality on various social media, the links of which are given in the chat box. We have also shared Mataji's website link. It's a personal website link. You can find it by the name of Aruddha Devidasi. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mataji. Dandavat pranams. Hare Krishna.
Thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. Hare Krishna.